Calm down, dear boy. We're writers, not Vikings.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Ansbach, one half of the Literary Outlaws, and we have come to take over Hank Garner Show.
We're hijacking this podcast. I'm your other host, Kevin G. Summers.
This would be the part where we said something nice about Hank, but there's nothing nice to say.
Well, you know, I think maybe I can think of one nice thing to say about Hank Garner, and that is for a long time, long time, before I had writer friends online, I felt all alone in the world, that I didn't have any writer friends out there at all. No one to talk shop with, no one to help me learn the craft or understand what it was like, the things that we all went through. And for all those years, if I had had a show like Hank Garner's Author Stories, I probably would have loved it, loved to have something like that. So, Hank, I just want to say thank you for bringing us 100 episodes, 100 writers that have shared their knowledge, passed it on to the next generation, which is their responsibility. Thank you for making that possible, and we all really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. Even though the show didn't get really good until episode 98, thanks all the same.
So we're going to let you have your show back now.
Good job, Garner.
See ya.
Well, everybody, we made it to episode 100 of the Author Stories podcast. Thank you for joining me this past couple of years while I've done this podcast. It's been a great pleasure to host it for you each week and to bring you all of the authors that have been guests on here and been so gracious with their time and their wisdom. I'm just happy to have gotten to be in the chair for all of this and sitting behind the microphone. You can find all the archives of the show at hankgarner.com, and while you're there, please click on the links to subscribe to the show and leave a comment. That helps other people tune in and find all the great shows that we've done, and we'll continue to bring you. I'm really happy to tell you about a new sponsor that we have this week, the AIPP, or the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. The AIPP is a new professional organization for freelancers who provides services for indie authors and small presses. This is one of the first organizations I've ever seen that bands together people that provide services and support for the author community. So their membership is open to editors, proofreaders, voice actors, author assistants, website designers, illustrators, graphic artists, interior book designers, formatters, cover artists. If you provide a service for authors and help support what they do, you can join the AIPP. Authors can also use the AIPP to search the member directory for the professional that you need. They can also register for a free account and post a job for members to apply for. So whether you provide services for authors or you're an author looking for someone to help you do what you do, check out the AIPP. Find them at AIPPonline.org or find a link in the show notes.
Hey Hank, it's Preston here from the Legendarium. Congratulations on 100 episodes of the Author Stories podcast. It's one of the few podcasts I make sure I listen to every week. I look forward to the next 100 episodes, and stay legendary, my friend.
Howdy, folks. I'm Chris Porteau, co-host of a most excellent podcast called Geeks of a Certain Age with Hank Garner. It's written into my contract, read before you sign, that I have to cross-promote Hank's other less important podcast, Author Stories. And the 100th episode, celebration is as good a time as any. Speaking honestly, folks, Author Stories is really floundering. For the love of God, please subscribe. Hank can't seem to get any traction with the thing. Maybe if he didn't record it in a shed with ham radio equipment. Low production values. Wow, how someone can produce so many episodes of something no one is listening to. Loves to hear himself talk. Well, that deserves some kudos right there for persistence, I guess. So, congrats? All kidding aside, my geek brother from another mother, congratulations on reaching your 100th episode of the Author Stories podcast. You get 5 pews from me. And hey, check off the box for my cross-promotion requirement. And stop threatening to call a lawyer.
Disbarred uncle in a leisure suit.
Wow, with friends like that, who needs... never mind. Thanks for everybody that sent in congratulations and well wishes on episode 100. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Thank you so much. Before we get into the show, I want to remind you to visit our good friends at thirdscribe.com. If you're an author, you need to be writing. You don't need to be managing a website and worrying about your mailing list and all of that good stuff. Rob and the good folks at Third Scribe can help you take care of all of that. Clear your plate of all the technical stuff and let you get down to writing. And that's what we all want to do, right? Nobody gets into writing so that they can have a really snazzy website. So go to thirdscribe.com. Let them help you, and you'll be glad that you did. Now on to episode 100. You know, when I first started this as a writer and as a podcaster, I made a couple of really good friends that have had very similar and parallel paths to me. Chris Porteau was one of the first, and we remain steadfast friends to this day, and we host another podcast together, Geeks of a Certain Age, as you could hear by him trying to fulfill his contractual obligations a minute ago. The other one is Stefan Bolz, and since I host a podcast with Chris every week, I thought I would invite Stefan on to help me reminisce about this last couple of years and 100 episodes, and just talk about the craft of writing from our perspectives, something that we don't do very often because I'm usually interviewing other guests. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and I hope you'll stick around for the next 600 episodes. Well, welcome to episode 100 of the Author Stories podcast. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I have a co-host. He's not so much a guest as he's my co-host for this episode today. My very good friend Stefan Bolz joins me today. Welcome, Stefan.
Thanks, Hank. I'm very happy to be here.
So, we've been kicking around some ideas for a couple of weeks on what to do, and I wanted episode 100 to be something special, but the more we talked about it, I realized that for a milestone like that, I didn't want it to be a particular guest as much as I wanted it to be a look back and a retrospective, not only on the podcast, but on kind of where I am and what I've learned over the last couple of years doing the show. And you and I have had a very similar journey, kind of parallel paths in a lot of ways. And I feel like that Stefan and I are very parallel in a lot of ways anyway. And so I thought... I have a handful of friends that I consider to be very close writer friends of mine. That would be Stefan and Chris Porteau, and I yak every week with Chris on Geeks of a Certain Age.
Right.
So I wanted Stefan to come on and just share this episode with me. So first off, welcome. And what is going on with you right now? I know you've been working on a sequel to the White Dragon Genesis. Where are things with that for you right now?
Our good friend Ellen Campbell has the second run through of the White Dragon Crucible, which is the second White Dragon book. She went through the first round of edits, came back to me. I put them all in. Pretty much all of them, and then she's now going through it one more time. I'm going through it one more time, and then I think I'm gonna have Amy read through it for a couple of spelling mistakes and stuff like that, and then we can probably, I'm hoping by mid to end of May, we can get it out there. It has been, I think it was last March or end of March or beginning of April, the year before when the first White Dragon came out. So it's
been just about a year.
My God.
One of my, you know how the Facebook memory things come up, and it was just a couple of days ago, I think, that I saw we posted an episode where the White Dragon came out.
Yeah.
So cool.
I know.
Great. I've had the privilege of seeing your new cover art that you guys have been working on, you and your cover artist, and man, I think you really struck on kind of the spirit of the book and the underlying themes, and which we were just talking about before we started recording, how hard that is translating that to a still image, that you're going to use for people to find your book. It's such a bizarre thing. But man, it looks fantastic. I think it's going to be great.
Thank you. No, it is interesting because I didn't even know. I mean, when you talk to a cover artist or anybody that would interpret your work, it's very hard. It's very hard for me to kind of boil it down so much to what is it really about?
Yes.
And that's really helpful for the whole writing process as well, I think. And then we went back and forth, and it didn't quite click. And then all of a sudden, Adam said, "Okay, let's do one more try." And there it was. The essence of the two books in two covers, beautifully, just like, oh my God, this is it. And you get this sense of it clicks. It was great. It was great.
Speaking of art and getting down to the essence of the story, sometimes when I write, I will have an idea in my head, and I'll sit down at the computer and play around in Photoshop and come up with some visual ideas. Or I'll pick up my guitar and I'll start just kind of plunking around and I settle on moods and that sort of thing, and that helps me to kind of visualize the story. Does anything like that work that way for you?
Actually, a couple of things. One is, I think I mentioned that to you before. There's this German painter, Hans Werner Sam.
Yes.
Sahm, and he paints very surrealistic, like paintings that kind of defy the natural laws of physics.
Right.
And they're just very deep, and that's one visual kind of cue that I always find very inspiring visually. And then there's music. It's still the same thing, Hank. We talked about this a year ago.
Yeah.
About Dragon Force. It's so funny because I never listened to them before I started White Dragon Genesis. I just stumbled upon them through YouTube, and then I started listening to them, and they opened up this epic, like, mega faucet of ideas. It's like I can set my clock. I go out, I do like every 2 weeks I listen to them, and boom, massive amounts of story come straight in while I listen to them. It's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
It's awesome.
The places where inspiration comes from, it's just it blows my mind. I am, after 100 episodes and recording more than 100 interviews, because I have some already recorded that haven't been released yet.
Stephen King,
some of these new up and comers.
Yeah.
I'm still amazed, fascinated, and in awe at where stories come from. That never, ever, ever gets old to me.
Right.
I love, and one of the reasons that I start every interview that I do with that silly question of what's your first memory of wanting to be a writer is because when you ask people that question, they start getting just flooded with memories of this kind of crazy inspiration of where things come from. And it always starts the greatest conversations because all of a sudden you've helped this person to kind of tap into this ethereal kind of this place where ideas come from, and it's everybody's different and everybody's the same. It's it all comes from the most disparate, odd places, but it's always like magic for people. I rarely talk to someone and they say, "Well, I have a I have a formula
idea
that
generator."
I follow." Right. It's magic. It's just magic.
Right. I mean, if you think about Mr. Salvatore, your last interview,
Yeah.
How he came up with the Drizzt Do'Urden name was
Exactly.
hysterical. I was like, oh my god, that brought me to so many other like people that I kind of listened to, like for example, Lee Child.
Yeah.
This one interview with him where this guy makes like a documentary about 1 year in his, or writing basically one novel.
Right.
And how he starts out with this novel, he started out with this sentence: they buried the guy in the woods, or at the edge of the woods. That was his first line, and he said he has nothing after that at all, and that was the only piece of information he had. And from that, he pulls out this book that sells, I don't know, 10 million times. It's crazy.
It's crazy. Right? It's crazy. Well, the flip side of that is, you never know where ideas are going to come from. You never quite know where the spark of inspiration is going to come from. But the other side of that is sometimes you don't even know where your path is taking you.
Right.
I think a lot of us have a plan. And I think it's a good thing to have a plan, to know that in a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, I'd like to be here. I would like to have published this or that. And I know a lot of us have a lot of ideas, and we think, well, I'll write this, and then I'll write that, and I'll write that. And kind of the best laid plans of mice and men. But I know for you, you had come off of a book, The Fourth Sage, that was extremely well received. You had a lot of people that were excited about that book, lots of great reviews, and I think you were even planning to write the follow-up to that, and were even working on it, when the White Dragon came and injected herself into your life. And talk about that for just a minute, about how plans are made and how those plans change.
I mean, I think, that was just for me. I was never a planner. Even when I was in my 20s, I never mapped out my future or said, oh, I'm going to college and then I'm going to study this and then I'm going to be a lawyer or something. I was always kind of floating, which had its pluses and its minuses, obviously. But I realize that my best advice would be make plans lightly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Make them, but not carve them into iron with a, just don't use permanent marker. Because they change, and sometimes they change for the better. And if you're kind of said, no, I'm going to do this, with The Fourth Sage, it flowed from the last book, from The Fourth Sage to the next one, like 2 days later I was starting it already, and I had a lot of ideas. And then Nick Cole and Michael Bunker came along with that idea of the White Dragon, the Black Dragon, and the Apocalypse Weird.
Right.
And this whole 3-book, now I think maybe even a 4 or 5 book series interjected, and I couldn't do anything about it. I could have said, no, I'm not going to do it. I want to continue with The Fourth Sage, in that series, one after the other, but I would not have had the joy of writing all those other books now that are a total joy for me.
Right.
So, I feel like make a plan, okay, but if it doesn't work out, all right, just go with the flow. I think that's my...
So what you're saying is write all of your life plans in pencil.
Exactly, in pencil. Yeah.
I understand that more than anyone.
Right, I know.
Sometimes things just come along and they just overtake what's going on, and there's nothing. I guess there is something you could do. You could refuse those things when they come along, but I think you do that at your peril and at the peril of your writing career.
Right. But on the other hand, I know a lot of people that have had a plan from the start, and they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they're happy doing it, and for them changing it would not make any sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, what's your personality like, and what are your strengths and weaknesses, and from there, I think if you're willing to kind of let go of the control a little bit, it'll lead you towards what makes you happy, your bliss, or whatever you would call it.
Yeah. So in this last couple of years, I met you when you had first, I guess you had just recently published The Fourth Sage, and the Three Feathers had been out for maybe a year or so.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You had written, I think, a few shorter works, and things were really going well for you there, and you were guest number 8 on
I know.
Author Stories. Oh man,
awesome!
I would not recommend going back and listening to some of those early. No, I would.
Listen,
I would.
Don't listen to Hank right now. Go right now. Go back to episode 1, Jason Gurley, and go through them again, because I think those raw first ones are very. It's like. Obviously, we're not Beethoven and Mozart, but if you look at Beethoven, for example, his music, if you go from the First Symphony to the Ninth Symphony, it is like a magnificent journey from the beginning all the way to the end. And if somebody would have said in the beginning, hey, your First Symphony, it's all right. And then he said, okay, I'm not going to stop. It's all part of that whole big journey. I think those first episodes, I think I'm going to go back now and listen to them again. But
and I've learned so much. That there's, I was looking back through some of those archives earlier and thinking of all the inspirational stories.
Right.
Like. One of the first ones that comes to mind was Jack and Jacinda Wilder.
Yes.
I know I've talked about them several times before, and man, they just had such an amazing story. They're the books they write are not necessarily ones that I
right.
read.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot deny.
Right.
When an artist has passion, they care about what they're doing. They obviously have found their audience and have made a direct connection with their audience, right. and are affecting people with what they do. And then on the other side of that, just the story of their success and how they were at a desperate point in their life, and they found this thing that not only allowed them to express themselves and to connect with people on a very human level, but it also allowed them to quite literally get out of a horrible situation, right. that they were in.
Right.
Man, if as we say in the South, if that doesn't light your fire, your kindling's wet. That's that it's just
right.
Man, that will fire you up. And I think one of the greatest things I've taken from doing these interviews is you learn a lot from people's process, but the inspiration and the motivation that every one of these people that's been on the show is just a regular human being like us, and
right.
and they all started at a place where they had a dream, they had a hope, and they had a story inside their head, and they found a way to share that with the world. And the idea that we all start on a level playing field, and it's up to us to do something with
mm-hmm.
it, man,
right.
is a very motivating thought.
Right. Yeah, and you meet so many people of so many backgrounds, so many different, even age groups or educational backgrounds, or where they live, all around the globe. And it's almost like little sparks starting, like the Legendarium, right?
Right.
I mean, how cool is that? You start a blog, and all of a sudden you get interviews, and it becomes bigger and bigger, and supporting the community. And then your blog, 100 episodes. That's amazing. Who would have thought when we did the number 8 that you would have Andy Weir and crazy, amazing authors on your show.
I know. I had a list when I started of people that I would love to get to talk to one day. And man, I have checked off so many of those.
That is so cool.
I had names like Patrick Rothfuss and Jim Butcher, and just people that I looked up to. And what is more fascinating than those to me sometimes are the people that I discover along the way that have more of an impact on me personally than some of those people that I imagined would.
Right.
I could sit here and name 100,
of
but
course.
I look back and every one of those 100 have built in me to be where I am now and to raise the level of my art, and it's amazing. It's absolutely
but that
amazing.
was what you set out to do, right? In the beginning,
Yes.
that was that you wanted to learn from other authors, and
That's right.
And that's you did that.
Yeah, and people have probably heard me say it before, but I was looking for podcasts that
Exactly.
that were interviews with authors, because I wanted to understand what made authors special. I wanted to understand what it was that helped them to grab a hold of the magic. And I found lots of podcasts about the business of publishing and writing and lots of that. And those are all great and helpful. And I'm friends with a lot of those podcasters, and I appreciate what they do. But that was not exactly what I was looking for.
Right.
So I said, I'll start the thing and just do it. And if there's ever anything that you want to see and you can't find it in the world, I think that's your calling to go make the thing that you can't find.
It's true. It's true. It's like with writing fantasy. I mean, how many times do we find ourselves in, like, I mean, I feel sometimes like a kid in a candy store when during the writing, what's happening next? Oh my God, this plot point is going this way. The character is developing into something completely different, and it's awesome in my mind. And I feel very blessed to just be able to write that. That's basically the reward at that moment, to write that story. Whatever comes later, I have no control over. But it is like if you wanna write something that you may not have read before in that way. It's really cool, like your story, the Mulligan, or I've never read a story like that before. It's really a Bloom. It's like new horizons and new seeds and new sparks that inspire people.
And I think that's one of the cool things about self-publishing, is that if you take a book like Bloom, I don't even know how to categorize it. It's such a weird
flowers.
It's obviously gardening. About flowers. It's such a weird little book, and and if you try to describe it to someone, it's I don't know how you describe it.
Yeah.
But self-publishing allows you to take things that you cannot describe to an agent, and it allows you to find a home for it. And man, what an incredible time, to have those tools. I was talking to a guy this morning. I recorded an interview this morning with Scott Pratt, and he writes courtroom thrillers. And man, he had such an incredible story because he's 60 years old. Right. He had one career in the military. He left the military and decided to start a brand new career as an attorney. Did that for 10 years and decided to start another brand new career as a writer. Because I think he said he picked up a Lee Child book and said, "Oh, I can write like this." And so he wrote a novel. He got an agent, got a 3-book deal, got 3 books published with a New York publisher. But then they kind of dropped the ball on marketing, and his books kind of got lost. Mm-hmm. And then they were going out of print, and he fought with the publisher to get the rights to his 3 books back. And then he self-published those, And at the time of recording this morning, he was the number 10 author on all of Amazon.
Oh my God.
Last week he was number 6. Just insane,
Right.
and he said that, at 60 years old, he's he now is in the midst of another career that he just rebooted his life, and said one day I'm going to do this, and
Right.
you talk about the tools available now to not be pigeonholed and to literally allow you to pursue and achieve anything you set your mind to.
Right.
It's an incredible time that we live in.
That reminds me of what Hugh Howey said once, and that was kind of what stuck with me amongst all the other. I mean, he has such an amazing mind, and also very generous to, let everybody in on his secrets.
Right.
But that you don't write one book, write like 10, right? Like, write a lot of books and don't worry about if they publish or how many sell and whatever. And then if you have 10, if one of them makes it, then the other will follow. And because all of us self-published authors, the first book is like, now I'm gonna have a pool, or whatever, or a helicopter. And
Helicopter.
Obviously, that doesn't happen in most cases, but you kind of after several books, you get it that it's a longer haul, but it's also, if we get to that point where we have 10, 15 books published, it's eventually, I feel like it's going to happen that something gets picked up somewhere and that leads to more. So it's just a matter of just continuing to write, daily.
Right. It's speaking of Hugh and his theory of writing a bunch, and
Right.
then when success finds you, you have a back catalog, ready. I mentioned that to Ernest Cline.
I know.
When
I
he was on the
remember
show.
when you said that. I remember.
Yeah,
that.
I honestly wanted to know what the opposite side of that coin was like, from what Hugh talked about, and Ernie was very familiar with Hugh's theory on that, and he was like, it would have been nice to have a back catalog built up. But we all are envious of those kind of problems, of finding success, because I don't know that you're ever really prepared for the success when it comes.
Right.
You could be 1 book in or 10 books in. And I think it's always going to kind of catch you off guard. I remember when I published Bloom, and the first email that I got from a reader, and where she just completely kind of spilled her guts to me about how this book had touched her, and she started telling me her personal story and how it paralleled with the character in the book, Huck, and I was completely overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with that.
Right.
It's when someone tells you that the art that you made has a profound impact on them.
Right.
That's a little overwhelming and greatly humbling. I could only imagine that on a scale of exponential proportions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. That phone call, from Steven Spielberg or Peter Jackson or whoever it is.
Right.
I had one of those moments that didn't lead anywhere, but I started out in screenwriting. So I wrote my first screenplay in 2000. It was called Bound to Fate, and I pitched it. Back then they had those pitching sessions where you could buy 5 minutes with a producer. It was $10 per producer. It was in New York City in a hotel. So I bought 10 slots, which is 10 producers. It was $100. So I drove in there and I pitched my story, which was very hard to pitch. But one of the people I pitched it to was the brother of Lawrence Matthys, and Lawrence Matthys is Circle of Confusion. He's the one that discovered the Wachowski sisters now. Back then, before The Matrix came out. So I pitched the script to his brother, and his brother said, all right, this is actually not bad, but it's not something we do, but if you ever have anything else, let me know. So then I bought the rights to Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice, and wrote the screenplay for that. And I wrote an email to Lawrence and said, listen, I have this, the rights to this book, and we're writing the screenplay, and he said, I'll call you. So I remember it as if it was yesterday. I was standing on the little terrace in our backyard, and the phone rings, and it's this 212 number from the city. And I pick up, and I never stumble or stutter or lost for words, but I could not say a word. It was like it was impossible for me to even comprehend that this guy called me. I mean, now I would say, hey, how's it going or whatever, but back then it was really it was crazy.
Did it take you very long to come into to become comfortable with your life as a writer, as an artist? Was that something that came naturally for you, or was that something that you had to build up to? Do you know what I mean? Your personal comfort with it.
Yeah, I still don't consider myself a writer, to be honest with you. Maybe that's just my own. I don't know what it is, but I'm still working as a real estate broker by day. That basically consumes most of my time, my work time, and then I write and do all this other stuff on the side. So I'm not really living the life of a writer. I'm living the life of somebody with two jobs, basically. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, but who does live the life of a writer?
No, I know, but I think like Andy Weir does now.
Well, yeah.
Or Hugh, I mean, Hugh is probably the totally exception, but if you only write like Meg
Jensen,
yeah. Right? Or Susan, Kay Quinn. So that's their job. They don't do other jobs. That's what they do. They're writers. That's who I would consider a writer. But I don't consider myself a writer yet. It's weird.
Yeah, but people buy your books. I understand what you're saying, and I too, I do podcasts, I do other, tech related work,
right.
Because I have a mortgage and 5 kids,
mm-hmm.
and there are things you have to do, to pay the mortgage. But I'm becoming more comfortable with the idea.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's good.
And it is something that I've definitely had to ease into, and probably one of the most I don't know, that there's something about publishing where you sometimes very literally laying your soul bare in front of people,
right.
and it's one of the most personal and very what's the word I'm looking for? You make yourself very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes, you make yourself very vulnerable to people, and that's something that takes a lot of work to build up the bravado to put that out and be proud of it. I think a lot of artists, a lot of writers, you'll write something and you kind of flinchingly hand it to people because you're just waiting for people to criticize it, and if they criticize it, are they criticizing you? How do you separate the artist from the art? And I'm always fascinated when I see people who are very confident
mm-hmm.
in their writing ability and their and just not caring what people think.
Right.
Do Do you still are you still very do you take it very personally when people enjoy what you write or when they don't enjoy it?
I mean, if you go back to my first book and now, I think there's a huge difference, because the first one, the Three Feathers, I was glued to every review, the devastating one and the beautiful one, and now, even with the beta readers, I sent the White Dragon Crucible out to beta readers, and I wasn't concerned anymore. It wasn't like, oh, what do they think? Or what the reviews that are coming in now, the last 10 reviews, it's like, okay, it kind of settles down. I think it's now more about the writing and the process of that and the stories versus the outer journey of maybe the respect you're getting, or the reviews or the stars on Amazon and stuff like that. I think it's it shifted definitely. This one I wasn't really concerned. I got great feedback, but I wasn't concerned about it when I sent it out, which is great. I'm very happy about that, about myself.
How do you feel about the beta reading process? How much weight do you give other people's comments on a book that you've just written?
That also changed. I was lucky, I guess, when I wrote The Fourth Sage. That had, I think, the most beta readers. I think I had 12 people that read it, and they all really, really liked it. There wasn't anybody that said, oh my God, you shouldn't have, gone in that direction or anything. So I was very lucky with that. And then the Genesis, White Dragon Genesis, also didn't have any major comments, little things obviously here and there, but nothing major. So I didn't have really any negative feedback from any of my beta readers so far. So I really don't know. I don't know what I would do, because I'm like, when I was watching the Lee Child thing, when he says he writes his draft and that's it. That's his book. It's not a draft. It's not. Right. There's no second draft or third draft. I'm the same way. I can't really restructure the whole thing or do 150 pages complete rewrite. I can't. That would be impossible for me. I hope this never happens.
I feel the same way. There obviously are revisions that happen, yes. But that's editing. That's not rewriting. And I kind of rewrite as I write. Each day when I come back to a project, I'll go over the previous day's stuff, and I'll fix things, and I kind of mold it and shape it as I go, so that when you do get to the end of that, it's not a rough first draft. It's kind of a completed work, Of course, it needs polishing and all that, but the idea of kind of the old days where you're typing it on a typewriter, and then at the end, you have a stack of paper next to you, and you turn around and you just retype the entire book again and rewrite it as you go. That is insanity to me. I could not imagine. I was reading a lot about screenplays when I was writing screenplays and learning about the craft and stuff. And for example, The Aviator, the movie The Aviator, right?
With what's his name?
Leonardo.
Leonardo, and the director is the Gangs of New York and Scorsese. They had 18 drafts of the script.
Oh, good
18
Lord.
times. The writer rewrote the whole thing. I mean, they have 18 different versions of that script, and I remember when I wrote my first screenplay, The Bound Fate, I think I have at least 25 versions of it. I mean, it was a 3-year process in which I learned a lot about it. So it was more like a learning curve than writing a screenplay. It was more about the learning than the writing. but it was more than 30, I think 33 or 34 different versions of 100-page script. And oh my God, I mean, it's too much. It's too much.
What do you think about genres? So the Fourth Sage is kind of this futuristic dystopian Big Brother kind of scenario, and the White Dragon is a complete end of the world fantasy book. Do you approach those two things differently, or do you even think about it? Does the story dictate the tropes and the window dressing, as it were, or do you think about it? Do you think, okay, I'm going to write a fantasy story with big magic and time travel and jumping through dimensions and all of this stuff, or do you think, okay, this is going to be a futuristic setting, it's going to be more science fiction, more political commentary, maybe? Do those things ever cross your mind, or is it just an extension of what's going on with you?
I think I'm a little bit like you in that regard. I'm more concerned about the personal relationship of the characters, or the character, him or herself, and then the setting is kind of fluctuating. The Fourth Sage, for example, starts out as a typical dystopian post-apocalyptic story, and then it turns into something completely different at the end.
Yeah,
it's kind of fantasy / sci-fi, and with telepathy and stuff in it. So that it's, I always feel like kind of pushing the boundaries. That's in hindsight, that's what I did, even though I didn't really think about doing that. But that's what happens. The same with the White Dragon. It's if you think of like a typical horror, either horror or end of the world scenario. But now second book is continuing the same feel, but it goes into an ancient Amazon tribe. It's way different, way off, not sci-fi, but also not really fantasy. It's more like, I don't know. So I think it's interesting to bend or to push the boundaries, because somebody started the first science fiction story before there was science fiction and completely pushed the boundaries of literary, genre into something different. And then apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic or dystopian came out of that only because somebody pushed into that area, right? So I think it's always great to just, if the story wants you to go some places, just go there, because it might just open up a completely different, it's all fantasy. I mean, in my book, it's all, unless you take even The Martian, because we can't go to Mars yet.
Right.
There's one fantasy aspect of the journey to Mars, and the same with Ready Player One. It's fantasy because we don't have the oasis yet. It's close.
Right.
But so
And at the core of all of those stories, it's the even if with The Martian, where the majority of the story is one person,
yes.
But it's his personal growth, it's his fight against,
exactly,
it's his fight against himself and against an entire planet. It's there's
and potatoes
and potatoes. But at the heart of it, you care about Mark Watney.
Right.
You don't really care where Mark Watney is.
Yeah.
Once you get over that initial, world building and stuff, you're there with Mark.
Right.
He just happens to be on Mars.
Right.
And the same with Wade Watts and Ready Player One. there's so yeah, that's it. It's just good storytelling.
Right.
I think we have invented all this stuff to wrap it in as ways to tell the story, but it's all about the storytelling.
Right. I agree with you.
Yeah. Another cool thing that's happened over the course of these couple of years that Author Stories has been going on is there has been a groundswell of anthologies that have come out, and with people like Samuel Peralta.
Right.
God love him. Thank you, Samuel, for all that you do for indie sci-fi fantasy.
He was your guest number 7.
He was the week before you, wasn't he?
Because I was so intimidated. Because he's a PhD, and he's incredibly intelligent. He's an amazing writer, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is great. And then I was like, please.
Well, what was crazy is I was introduced to Samuel through Jason Gurley. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I'll do an interview with someone, I'll follow up with that interviewee, a week or so later, and give them an update on how the podcast was received, and ask them if they have any recommendations for authors they know that might be a good fit for the podcast. And so the first person Jason told me was Samuel Peralta. Okay. And he said he's like a nuclear physicist. He's a poet, and he's writing fiction now. And trying to hold those things in my head at the same time, I was like, so what you're saying is Samuel Peralta's a unicorn.
Exactly.
And okay, I get that now. And I read some of his first stories, and man, you talk about beautiful. I mean, this man writes some epic prose. Yeah. And then you talk to him, and he's such a humble guy. Man, that's so amazing. So anyway, we got off track praising Samuel Peralta for a second, but Samuel has when I interviewed Samuel, he was just launching his first anthology, right? And what he's done is he has built a platform to give a lot of new writers and many established writers, but built this platform where he curates stories based around a theme, and kind of the traditional anthology model that's been going on in science fiction for years, but has harnessed the power of Amazon marketing, and has launched so many writers into the stratosphere, and just given so many people a platform and so much exposure that maybe they couldn't have gotten on their own. So generous with his platform, so humble in doing it, and but you and I both have published stories in one of his anthologies, and I think in seeing the success that Samuel has had, it's motivated other people to do a similar thing. Yeah. Chris Porteau did an anthology this past fall that you and I both had stories in. Not only has this kind of surge in that medium, the anthology that's kind of made a big splash in the self-publishing world. It has opened so many doors and given so many people a platform that I'm super thankful for it. What has your experience been with anthologies and joining some of these collectives and getting to stand side by side with some of these other authors? I mean,
there was one big one was definitely Apocalypse Weird, even though it wasn't, it's no longer going, but it still kind of resonates, and people are still working on stories for it and things like that. I love being part of a group of people that do something together, it can only help everybody so tremendously.
Yeah.
I remember the first one in the Time Travel Chronicles, The Traveler. I'm so happy I was able to write that story, and without the anthologies, without Sam, I would have never written it. And the same with the White Dragon. I would not have written that without Apocalypse Weird, or the other one, Chris Porteau, the Tales of the Apocalypse. We wouldn't have written it. I mean, maybe later, but that spark was because of that, of the anthologies, and I think it does. I mean, Sam, I think he has like over 150 stories now, all in all. It's a huge amount of stories, maybe over 100 authors.
Yeah.
That 90% of them have started in the last 3 years writing, and such a huge exposure. It's very, I mean, the camaraderie and the learning from each other and helping out each other, is tremendous.
Well, a few years ago there was a lot of press about the air quotes Kindle millionaires, the people that had, when Kindle publishing first became a thing, and people were running in and they were writing books and putting up there, and you had this handful of people that became millionaires, but sellers sold over 1 million copies of these books, and then you had this gold rush of all these people that came in to take advantage of that,
right. And
there was kind of a glut of that attitude,
right?
It's kind of been a couple of generations of the KDP and Kindle. KDP Select and those things that have matured and changed, and through those processes of change, you've seen a lot of the chaff get sifted out,
right?
And the wheat separated from the chaff, if you want to use that example. And what you're seeing, I think, in a lot of these anthologies is you've got a lot of serious writers who are wanting to join forces with other serious writers, and they want to be better writers, and they want to find an audience because they have stories that they want to tell, and they really believe that they have something to say.
Right.
And these anthologies and some of these collectives and some of these joint ventures are allowing people to stand shoulder to shoulder with other people that have similar interest and similar goals, and is allowing us to lift each other up.
Right.
And what an awesome thing.
No, I think it's great. And it also gets more people into the indie publishing community.
Yeah.
Readers become that would have never read anything. They read an anthology, and there are like 4 or 5 other authors that they're now starting to read, and most of them are independent authors. So I think it helps tremendously the whole community, each one of those anthologies. It's great.
And as a writer, there's something cool about, we all have our own process of coming up with ideas and where stories and books come from. But it's an entirely different set of muscles that you use when someone says, okay, I'd like for you to write a story, and this one is about time-traveling koala bears. And that's all you get. But you know that you must write a story, and it's got to involve a time-traveling koala bear. And that creative process is completely different, and it makes you use a different set of tools and a different set of muscles that makes you a better writer.
Right.
When Chris told me, I want you to write an end of the world story and it's got to feature an animal, I was like, I don't write end of the world stories.
Right.
That's not my wheelhouse. But but when someone infects you with that idea, if you allow yourself, that it starts growing and becomes a thing. So I've gotten to write, me personally, I never would have written Seventh Son of a Seventh Son if it weren't for Apocalypse Weird. I would not have written Writer's Block if it weren't for Apocalypse Weird, because when I finished that, I was thinking that I was about to start Mulligan 2, and I just wanted to write a little silly story to kind of clear my brain.
Yeah.
And it was because I was coming off of that book that I wrote writer's block. And then I wrote that first writer's block story, and people started just inundating me with what happens next.
Right.
Like, nothing happens next. It's just a standalone short story, you know.
It's writer's block. There's nothing that can happen next.
Yeah. Does anything happen? And I was like, well, I don't know if anything happens, you know. So let me think about it. And then all of a sudden, you know, 4 more episodes come out of that. Right. And because of that, writer's block is probably the most proud of something that I've ever been. Like, it is on a personal level, it means something to me that a lot of people will never know about. And it's on many layers. But it has allowed me to tell a story that has touched me as much as it has other people, and has allowed me to write a kind of a weird fantasy that I've always wanted to write. A real life story with magic, but the magic is subtle, and it's just been one of the most fun and most fulfilling things I've ever done. And I can directly attribute that to working with a band of friends on this other thing. Right. You just never know what thing is going to lead to the other thing that's going to lead to the thing. Right. You know? Right. So it goes back to what you said earlier, you know, hold your plans very loosely, because when those opportunities come around, man, it sure is nice to be available to take advantage of those. Right.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of Svengali, the 4th one, writer block, and I'm completely enjoying it. I'm like, oh, I have to get the next one, and I'm waiting for the 5th one now. It's very good, very, very good.
Knock on wood, it should be, the 5th one should be available when this episode comes out.
Nice.
I just have a few finishing touches I'm hoping to publish it this weekend.
And then the omnibus, which will be the oxymoron, right? The omnibus of the writer's block, like Chris Porter said.
That's right. That's right. And hopefully there's I think I'm going to add a little bonus content to the omnibus, so we'll see. That's that'll be fun. But yeah, it's one of the most fun things that I've ever done, and I would never have planned to do a serial like that. It just didn't. But I think those things. I think if you plan to do a serial like that, it feels kind of contrived.
Yes, that's right.
And I don't like that. Right. But this was the most naturally born thing ever. I don't know that I'll ever do it again. I sure won't do it on purpose.
Well, you need a different typewriter.
Obviously.
You know, that one is probably that electric one has probably fulfilled its function.
Probably so. I have that electric typewriter that's in the story. It sits on the floor in my office behind me. I'll have to put a picture on Instagram.
Yes.
Because that's awesome. That's so weird. That was one of those silly stories that just came out of nowhere as I'm sitting in my office, and I'm going through a file that I have on my computer of story ideas, and I look over and I've got this old typewriter that was given to me by someone who was just going to throw it away, and I've never actually plugged it up and used it. It may be magic, I don't know, but it's just one of those things that I said I need that in my office, and it inspired this whole thing. So It's crazy.
Right.
It's crazy. But so what's next for you? What are you gonna? I know you've got White Dragon Crucible that's coming out. Yeah. Do you have any other stories that you're writing for anthologies? Anything slated?
If Sam Peralta is listening right now, I pitched him like probably 200 other authors pitched him a story about the Mars Chronicles.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on. I don't want to push him at all, but that would be, I have this story idea and I'm going to write it anyway.
Yeah.
So that's that. It's called The Eye of the Needle. And then I don't think I have another anthology coming up anytime soon, not that I know of. And then there's the third.
I might know of I might know of a couple. I'll throw you a bone.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Ooh.
and we'll talk later.
All right, okay. We'll talk later. And then finishing the White Dragon series, which I thought it had 3 books, but now I just discovered that there might be a 4th or a 5th one, so I'm not sure. And then the 4th stage has to be, there are 3 more books in that. So I have at least 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's other things, like 7 books still kind of in me that are gently pushing to become, published.
Right.
So next 5 years, I think, written in pencil.
Right.
Well,
you're almost 30 now, so that'll
I'm almost
get you
31. Yeah.
Right. So that'll get you to almost middle age
40,
by the time
45.
you get there.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Stefan, if you had to sum up
Mm-hmm.
in the last couple of years of your writing career, what have you learned about the craft, and what have you learned about yourself?
Okay, one thing I learned was, and I just read that on Facebook, was the best time or the best way to find mistakes in your manuscript is after you push the publishing button.
Absolutely.
But that's getting better. But I think what I learned was to take the time. Don't rush it. Whatever it is. The publishing is definitely a long haul. It's not a 5-year or even less. It's like a 20-year process. So I think not rushing it was a big thing that I learned. Not trying to push something out before it's ready. And let the story develop. I can't set any deadlines for me because I don't write for 4 days and then I write again and then it's kind of like back and forth and back and forth. It takes more time than I thought it would, and that's fine. And the other thing I learned was to always, when you get an idea at 2 o'clock in the morning, you do write it down. You do not think, oh, I'm going to remember it in the morning. You would never, ever do that, right? So that's another big thing. And I think the biggest thing is to just the people you meet, the incredible friendships that develop. I think that was my biggest learning experience, besides little things here and there about marketing and craft and stuff like that comes with it anyway. But I think that the people that I am privileged to know, like you and so many people that just enrich my life just because of that. And I think you're the only one I met of my author friends, and I will probably never meet any of them in person. Right. As crazy as that is, but it's still good friendships that develop with people.
I agree. I have to say that if I've learned anything over 100 episodes, it is that the friendships and the connections that you make are worth more than gold. That not only do I bounce ideas off of you and off of Chris and several other people, I trust your opinion. I trust that when I ask you a question, you're going to be bluntly, brutally honest, and you're going to tell me that does not make sense and it's stupid. And no, you've never told me that, but you will tell me if it's not a good idea. You will also tell me that that idea is magic, and that I'm on to something. And those kinds of things, people that will encourage you when you need to be encouraged, will give you honest feedback, because honest feedback from a friend is better than empty praise from strangers any day.
Right.
Those things are things that matter. On top of the connections that you make, where people lift you up and and give you exposure and things like that you could never do on your own. Those are things that come from being humble and honest with other people and doing things for the good of others instead of yourself, and those things come about with time. So yeah, just if I've learned anything over this past 100 episodes, it's to cherish the connections that you make and to close your mouth and listen to other people. Yeah, for sure. Well, Stefan, thanks for coming on and sharing this this episode 100 with me.
That was so quick. It was like 5 minutes, right?
I know. It's crazy how it happens. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, well, here's to another 100.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, please go to iTunes and rate the show. Give us 5 stars or whatever you think it deserves. And while you're there, please leave a comment. Also, remember, Author Stories Insiders get access to the shows early. So go to hankgarner.com and click on the Insider link, and you can subscribe. It's only $10 a year, and have access to our super secret forums where we talk about upcoming shows and get early access. Thanks for listening.